I feel so socially awkward when I start these videos. I mean, I just don't know how to say hi to you. Well, if you don't know, my name is Chris. I live inside your phone, and I will not rest until I reach 100,000 subscribers, at which point I will release the hostages. Hey, you know those Eat the Rich movies?
부자들이 원래 순진해 꼬인 게 없고 부자집은 또 애들이 구김살이 없어.
대림이야 대림이. 돈이 대림이다.
Yeah, those ones. Have you noticed they're a bit different these days?
I'm sorry! I'm sorry! I'm sorry! I'm sorry!
They're definitely changing.
I'm sorry!
On one hand, I feel the critique of society and capitalism that runs through these films and shows is getting more simplistic. Or maybe like flatter is a better word. Also, and this is kind of weird, there's been an uptick in messianic characters in these kinds of stories as well. No, seriously, Jesus is entered the chat multiple times in these films. He just slides on it like a slippery little fish. But on the other hand, I'm starting to see an internal struggle with the concept of not just class, but evil in these kinds of films and shows. And ultimately, I find that more promising artistically than the pre-COVID era approach generally taken by Eat the Rich movies. And that's another thing too, by the way. Eat the Rich media definitely underwent a significant artistic shift after Mother Nature dropped her latest pandemic. So let's start overthinking it. Anyway, let's briefly define some terms. Eat the Rich media is a term I'm using to broadly refer to TV, films, games, and, well, any art released in the past like 15 years or so that contain themes and messaging that antagonize the upper classes in society. I think I nailed that in the first take. Easy. Boom. That's it. That's the whole definition. Go fuck you, Webster. Whoever you are, probably some nerd. Anyway, Eat the Rich media has become immensely popular, and it shows no signs of slowing down since it initially exploded as a trend in 2013 or so. Gee, I wonder why it started to get so popular at that particular moment in time. I mean, apropos of nothing, here's a 2014 article about a study that we did that proves that the United States is an oligarchy. So, you know, that's just a bit of extemporaneous information. Look, sometimes these movies and shows are good, sometimes they suck, sometimes they're in the middle, but regardless of the quality of any given entry into the canon, it's a type of art that has artistically evolved over time along a number of trajectories in really interesting ways. For instance, tonality. In the early 2010s, Eat the Rich movies tended to be more serious in tone, usually fairly humorless, and more starkly brutal. Like Snowpiercer and the first two Purge movies are good early examples. While all these films have moments of humor, you wouldn't really call them satire. They're just straightforward genre flicks. Snowpiercer is an action film, through and through, and The Purge is like horror action, home invasion thriller for the first one, I guess. By the way, The Purge is set in the year 2022, so that's a fun little, that's fun. Anyway, violent fantasies and grimdark allegories are the dominant mode of Eat the Rich media right up until about the year 2019. The gap between rich and poor had grown much wider by that time, but had yet to make the stratospheric jump it did over the pandemic. 2019 is like the midpoint of Eat the Rich media's journey to the new era we're now currently in, and it's the year that we start seeing films and shows adopting a more like satirical, impish, dark comedy kind of tone. However, at this time, most entries in the genre still skew toward at least a self-seriousness. This is the era of Parasite, Knives Out, Ready or Not, Us, Hustlers. And 2019 is when we also start to see a new trope emerge in the Eat the Rich genre, which is the fish out of water scenario. It goes like this. A person or group from a lower class is thrust into the world of the upper crust either by invitation or their own cunning, but never through genuine class mobility. Which is pretty spot on, right? Like, people who aren't rich just don't get rich. That would require too much suspension of disbelief and would be too unrelatable for these characters to then serve their purpose as audience inserts. Suffice to say, the fish out of water trope has gone on to become the dominant framing for Eat the Rich stories today. Like, almost all of them have this framing. Anyway, going along the timeline here, COVID hits, we have a gap year or two of traditional media production, some stuff happens that probably isn't important at all, and Eat the Rich picks up right where it left off, largely unchanged except for a few subtle but significant shifts. And it's in how the rich are most often being portrayed. See, pre-pandemic Eat the Rich media tends to portray the rich as more broken than anything. Like, think Succession. The Roy family are selfish and cruel and use their wealth to satisfy those urges. But the show is more of an examination of the family's dynamics and psychology in terms of like how they got to where they are, rather than one of, for instance, how class functions. The focus of the show is on their tragic pathos. The series definitely has moments where it critiques capitalism as a whole, but the Roy family's moral corruption is only shown to be an extension of their class insofar as them being spoiled made it easier for them to be less empathetic. The show is basically saying rich people are broken and sad because they come from a long line of morally corrupt people. And money plays a part in that, right? But they're abusive and awful, and it's just a terrible patriarch doing emotional abuse to his kids. Like, that's why they're fucked up. But post-pandemic, there's a change in tone and an additional layer of contempt that gets added to the mix by portraying the rich as humorously incompetent and generally kind of dumb, a la White Lotus. Another strange and inexplicable phenomenon. So now the brokenness of the rich becomes a farce to laugh at rather than something to seriously examine and ruminate on. Their hypocrisy, their daddy issues, whatever it is, it's all a two-dimensional, darkly comic thing. You can actually see this shift in tone between the two Knives Out films, like one which came out in 2019 and one which came out after the pandemic. The first one occasionally paints the rich as clowns, but there's like a respect for their cunning and a gravitas to its understanding of their cruelty. It's like overall a more serious movie. But the second movie, Glass Onion, is way more cartoonish, more bombastic, less self-serious, and has contempt for its Elon Musk-based character, but like in a hand-waving kind of way. Oh, what an idiot. And this trend of portrayal has basically reached a fever pitch, so that by the present day, the rich that we're eating in cinema and television are almost exclusively uncomplicated buffoons. I like to call this slow transformation of tonality and portrayal the Flanderization of the rich.
Calm down, diddly 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 diddly. They did their best, shoddily iddly iddly diddly. Gotta be nice, hostility diddly biddly diddly.
Cite me, bitch. Oh, and if you don't know, here's what Flanderization means. I'm too lazy to write it out in the script. The video is long enough as it is. The Flanderization of the rich, I think, reveals the emptiness of the critique for capitalism and the 1% that most of these films and shows like supposedly have. Wow, Chris, are you saying that the Eat the Rich genre isn't as politically deep or revolutionary as it pretends to be? What a fresh take. Yes, on this channel I have once again led you into a pretty common criticism of anti-capitalist art, which I already covered in an earlier video. It goes a little something like this. A lot of these movies and shows are really just focusing on how awful rich people are as individuals. Their systemic cruelty is portrayed as the sum total of their power plus their moral failure. And while that's not an entirely inaccurate portrayal for many of the rich people we love to hate, the real problem is that class itself creates cruelty all on its own, whether the rich people in question suck or not. Now, if you watched my aforementioned video, you'll know that I think that too often that very valid critique is used to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to art like this. And while I think the compromised and limited politics of the genre have become more obvious over time, I also think artists have started to become aware of and internalize this critique of their work as well. I mean, it's no secret, we do think pieces about it all the time. So now that we're entering a new era of the genre, heralded by films like Mickey 17, Death of a Unicorn, Clown in a Cornfield, Opus, and Companion, to name a few, we get more films and shows with an internal tension about that very subject, which leads to art that seems to be more interested in broadening the scope of their critique beyond capitalism and the rich themselves, at the best of times even interrogating the nature of evil, but also still refusing to let go of the notion that we are either completely doomed or that we all just need a change of heart or a savior to come along. And then, of course, there's Sinners. We'll get to Sinners, which is an entirely different beast that I do still consider part of the genre, but it completely bucks the trend of multiple genres and just knocks it out of the park. But for right now, let's just take a deeper look at the new era that we find ourselves in, what's good about it, and where it fails. Mickey 17 is a science fiction black comedy adventure set in the year 2054 and follows Mickey Barnes, a worker assigned to undertake the most perilous tasks on a spaceship traveling to colonize the distant ice planet of Niflheim. Thing is, Mickey's a clone. Each time Mickey's dangerous work results in his death, a new clone of him is created with his memories restored, making him a perfect source of infinite labor. It's all part of his corporate contract aboard the ship. Eventually, a cloning mishap occurs, and Mickey's 17th iteration gets doubled by Mickey 18, and then both clones have to secretly coexist to avoid execution. So that's the somewhat misleading setup for Mickey 17, and in my opinion, it's the film that's like kind of ground zero for the nouveau Eat the Rich. Something that's both impressive and fitting because the writer-director Bong Joon-ho has been a major innovator in the genre since its inception. A fascinating and very good filmmaker. And he basically does two types of movies: slower, artsy, contemplative films, and on the other hand, big action adventure films. Still artsy, but with a very different vibe and structure. And Mickey 17 straddles the line between the two, where its first half seems to be a quirky art house film about exploitation and the nature of the self, and then in the latter half, it abruptly flips into a sci-fi adventure about racialized imperial colonialism with heavy Okja Starship Trooper Ender's Game vibes. Maybe it's a hot take, but I think it's a really solid movie. Given its scale and scope, Mickey 17 is able to go way deeper than you'd expect with the many subjects that it brings up. I particularly like what it does with Toni Collette's character, who is the wife of Mark Ruffalo's Trump-style dictator in the film. So she's the genre standard rich white woman who is racist and self-serving.
No. Oh, it's nothing like that.
But the film is able to gesture at something a bit more complex by making fetishization her primary motive in colonizing and subjugating another race.
What an event. This is a truly novel ingredient. This opens up a whole new world of potential sauces. It's such a godsend, too. It is free from harmful pathogens, correct?
She wants to literally consume the indigenous population, destroy them, and sell them in an overtly eroticized way.
Oh, wow.
And that's a good understanding of how racism and colonialism historically have functioned. There's a sexualization of consumption and an eroticized view of the colonized.
Delicious sauces.
Oh, sauce is the true litmus test of civilization.
Get Out kind of did this, but like this is done sort of in a different way. It's a bit broader and applies to like colonialism as opposed to just racism. Gee, I wonder if there's like a historical precedent for something like that.
I'm creating a world on a pure white planet full of superior people. Isn't that right, Down?
Yes, it's his vision,
My
his
vision.
sensibilities.
Sensibility.
But let's be honest, with your medical record.
And a fetishized body is a body that's being treated as a piece of meat to be devoured. Mickey 17 very clearly draws that connection, and it's all the better for it. It's a connection that's also drawn in another new wave Eat the Rich the movie, Death of a Unicorn, but in a way that feels unintentional and therefore yuckier. Death of a Unicorn is a dark comedy horror film centered on Ridley and her father Elliot, who accidentally hit a unicorn with their car while on their way to spend a weekend at the estate of Elliot's boss, who owns a prominent biotech company. Anyway, after discovering the creature's body, they bring it to said estate, where the evil Corpo family becomes obsessed with exploiting the unicorn for its mythical healing properties. As in Mickey 17, it's a film wherein an infant is stolen from an indigenous group for the express purpose of perpetually exploiting that group into extinction, which then incurs the wrath of Mama and Papa, and a reckoning ensues. In Death of a Unicorn, the fetishization of the exploited isn't explicitly stated, but just sort of performed by the movie itself. So, whoops. The unicorns, I think, more than anything, are probably intended to represent climate change, or at the very least, their wrath is meant to represent climate change. But it's still pretty unignorable that they're an indigenous species with a mystical connection to nature, and they've got a real big horn that's good for you to consume and also virile enough to kill via thrusting. And if you exploit these docile creatures who are at one with nature too much, they turn into violent demons who do a repercussion. All of those elements put together is literally how every single enslaved or colonized group has ever been fetishized. There's some other uncomfortable race stuff in Death of a Unicorn too that deserves its own video, but I'm not the guy to do it. The real reason why I've looped the film into the discussion is because despite Mickey 17 being a far superior work of art, the two movies basically have the same exact solution to the same exact problem they're both interested in. And whether or not that new solution goes on to be a defining trope of the new wave of Eat the Rich, I still think it's pretty revealing. Essentially, according to either film, in order to stop capitalism, colonialism, exploitation, what have you, we kind of need Jesus. In Mickey 17, the day is saved when a literal resurrected man gives his life in sacrifice for the sins of humanity. And in Death of a Unicorn, the only way to stop the very phallic onslaught is to have a maiden who is pure of heart to bridge the gap. And that's not editorializing. The unicorn literally reaches into Jenny Ortega's soul and can sense she is a, quote, maiden pure of heart. And for good measure, there's also a resurrection at the end. Now, while I find waiting around for a savior to be a subpar political prescription to the issues that these films raise, I want to be clear. I don't think it necessarily detracts from them artistically. I could fuck with a good Messiah story every now and then. I'm not that much of a bummer. Art being good isn't dependent on how sufficiently systemic or leftist its solutions are. Unless maybe if the stated artistic goal is to be a politically revolutionary work, in which case, yeah, okay, docking points for ho-hum politics is fair play. But Eat the Rich films very rarely claim claim to be leftist or revolutionary. They're just responding to the zeitgeist, for better or for worse. But the savior fantasy in both Mickey 17 and Death of a Unicorn, and to a lesser degree other films in the New Wave, is notable for a few reasons. First, it's a kind of wish fulfillment that really speaks to the perceived hopelessness of the moment. Our prior go-to fantasies for salvation from the rich have pretty much been ruined by the stark reality of the past 10 years. In 2025, audiences have been mostly disenchanted by the notion of billionaire saviors, existing political structures handling the situation, or vigilantes taking matters into their own hands. On that last point, I'm not saying Luigi has fallen out of public favor or anything like that, but I am saying that the notion that Luigi's alleged actions could spark a revolution at this moment in time or function as a systemic solution to the problem isn't very believable to audiences. No one thinks Batman's gonna save us. I know all of us would love to be able to just sacrifice a handful of CEOs to the lava gods to create a post-capitalist society, but I just don't think that that's gonna work. You need to sacrifice all of them. Anyway, since our old fantasies have been sort of ruined by cold, hard reality, the saviors of the new wave of Eat the Rich are relocated back into the ranks of the masses. In other words, our savior isn't a billionaire or a great leader or a vigilante. They're one of us. While that seems kind of empowering at first, it also has the double effect of damseling ourselves. Ordinary people are cast as the captives who need to be saved by someone else among us who's just being very special. We see this fantasy play out in other recent entries in Eat the Rich media, like Companion and Clown in a Cornfield. To be fair, I'm stretching it a little bit. The hero in those films are less a messiah or a chosen one, but they're still a very special everywoman. And this is actually all connected to what I mentioned at the start of the video. The fact that in all of the films that I've mentioned thus far, the exploitative nature of capitalism is portrayed as part and parcel with the morality of the rich. And the portrayal of the rich and powerful as exclusively bad people gives the impression that if we could just win the battle of morality, be pure of heart like Jenny Ortega, or just apply ourselves super hard like the final girl in Clown in a Cornfield, or die for our sins like Robert Pattinson, the system itself would purify and become less cruel. That ties together because the notion of a savior and the notion of an upper class that's exclusively full of narcissists are both very comforting concepts that feed off of each other. This is why we flanderize the rich. We get to feel better about ourselves while also relieving ourselves of the responsibility to do anything. Because we're better than the completely irredeemably evil rich people on screen, and a savior is going to come for us eventually, so, no big deal. Now, to be fair to the films that lean into this kind of portrayal of the upper class, we are constantly reminded every day of the existence of rich people who are dumb, narcissistic, undeserving, corrupt, and sadistic. Mostly because they won't leave us alone. They just keep insisting on having publicists. It makes sense to start putting these guys into movies to then dunk on. But at the end of the day, not only does that approach fail to tell the whole story of class, a lot of the time it also narrows the focus so that there's less breathing room for art in the genre. This is also why Parasite is still such a good film, and for my money, probably the best Eat the Rich has to offer, with maybe one exception. Its critique is good because it highlights how the system corrupts everyone, turns us all into parasites, without portraying that corruption as a holistic moral failing. The rich family in Parasite is generally nice. As it's pointed out by one of the characters, they can afford to be. And while they are also classist and snobbish in many ways, they're not people who enjoy causing harm. They seem like a family doing their best to enjoy themselves and be generally good people. The working class families in the film, by comparison, are more unethical and cutthroat, and not just as a way to survive, which would make them less morally complicated, but out of a genuine desire for a better life. They don't want to just subsist, they want more for themselves. So what happens is each group winds up feeding off of the other. Parasite. The rich suck the blood of the poor, and the poor suck the blood of whoever they can, and so on and so forth. No one is fully good. No one is fully bad. Everybody is doing something shitty, but because of the roles that the system has given them, they're cogs falling into place. Capitalism makes bloodsuckers of us all. Good critique. But Parasite also happens to be good art because it looks at the human toll of existing in such a system. It crushes you and numbs you and makes you indifferent to the suffering of others and puts violence inside of you. I've seen a lot of people hold Parasite up as a tired example of Eat the Rich, and I just think it deserves better. Stop picking on Parasite just because it won an Oscar. Anyway, Parasite aside, I've been talking about the bad and the ugly of Eat the Rich art, but it's not all bad and ugly. I think I have a glimmer of a hope that something new and good is slowly starting to form within the genre. And that's despite the fact that it feels as if almost every single platform and industry is bending over backwards these days to disrespect even the concept of art. So let's talk about evil. You know, when I started writing this was supposed to be my low effort video. That went out the window pretty quickly. Before I move on, do me a favor and share this video and click buttons. Just randomly start clicking buttons. Hopefully the one with the bell. And maybe consider giving me money on Patreon. You can also go to my website. I think it's pretty cool. No pressure. There are a lot of other more deserving places your money can go. But if you're inclined, it'll go a long way in supporting me through making these videos and paying bills. Clearly, I'm gonna need it. Like, look what I do in my free time. Priorities are crazy.
When you killed these men, afterwards, were you repulsed? Were you upset?
No, at the time, it was almost addictive. It was almost a surge of energy. I wouldn't have to worry about any of their needs or anything. I just had complete control of the situation.
What the fuck is evil? What do we mean by that, right? Is it a temptation that we give into, or is it a possessive demonic force? Is evil really all that meaningful? One night, about a year ago, after having finished all the shows I was currently watching, I decided to take a chance on A Murder at the End of the World. It's written and produced by Britt Marling, who is coming off the coattails of the OA, a good but very uneven show. So I was curious. If you don't know, A Murder at the End of the World is an eat-the-rich, neo-noir murder mystery with light sci-fi elements, and the thing about me is that those are all my favorite words to string together in a sequence. The show is structured so that the story swaps back and forth between a flashback narrative and a current-day narrative. In the flashback sequences, the two main characters are hackers who meet over a subreddit dedicated to finding the identity of a serial killer with a trail of cold cases. They meet up in real life, both compelled to go out into the field together to try to find the guy and bring him to justice, and along the way they start a romance. I promise this is important context. Anyway, they eventually find the killer. He shows up with a gun, but instead of shooting our protagonists, he shoots himself instead. In the next scene, the two lovers are decompressing from their traumatic experience in their motel bath, and it's kind of a scene you have to watch in full.
Did you see his face? I wonder what was in his eyes.
I don't think it matters.
I guess in a way it's like we were appreciating what he'd done.
What are you talking about? He had a gun. He was about to shoot us. I thought we were gonna die.
We didn't. He did. Because he couldn't face.
But who cares about him? He's nothing. He's the result of faulty programming. He's the juice concentrate of a system that needs to be fed dead bodies in order to survive. He's boring and predictable, like the most basic code cycling over and over again until all the women are destroyed and the world just burns.
What are you saying?
I'm saying you want the killer to have meaning, and he doesn't have meaning. He's just a killer.
It really speaks for itself, doesn't it? This might be my favorite singular moment in all of television. And when you boil it all down, it's a comment on the nature of evil and how we choose to relate to it. Darby is obsessed with the serial killer because he's evil, and she wants to know what makes him tick. She wants to find meaning in his cruelty. Why is he like this? What was he thinking? What's the meaning of it all? These questions are the ones that every single piece of Eat the Rich media is begging, if not outright asking. Every single one. Because when you're talking about the root of cruelty, even in a political, systemic way, these questions arise explicitly or implicitly. Why are they like this? What are they thinking? What's the meaning of it all? And I think this scene in A Murder at the End of the World has the key to allow us to not just make better critique, but to make better art. Okay, so here's how it's going to work. I'm going to briefly show you the different ways art, and particularly film, has approached the topic of evil and how that's culturally shifted over time. And then we can tie it all together while looking at an example of an absolutely arresting example of art that just so happens to weave a fresh perspective on evil, a genuinely complex critique of capitalism and race, and also a comment on how people today, all people, are denied their right to produce art and culture, and therefore history and meaning and humanity. That's what's going to happen whether you like it or not. You are pot committed to this video. Let's just do this. Okay, so if you look back at the early days of film, the approach to evil people and evil acts was most often to portray it as a holistic, resolute thing. In other words, people who did evil were evil people through and through. No redeeming qualities about them. And that went for supernatural monsters, people possessed by the devil, or ordinary people possessed by greed and selfishness. Sometimes we romanticized that evil, like in the 1931 classic The Public Enemy. Basically, a precursor to every gangster edgelord movie you've ever seen. James Cagney's character in the film is portrayed as someone who's just irredeemably bad, and bad for society. But there's a fascination and glamorization that comes along with that, even to the point where he's given a death that really endows him with a lot of grandeur. What's notable about The Public Enemy, though, is that there isn't really an attempt to understand why the protagonist is so evil, in my opinion. Just an attempt to reveal the depths of that evil. It's like one scene after the other, just showing how bad he could actually be. Was it his upbringing? Was it society? These weren't the questions that the film was particularly concerned with. Same for horror films, right? The evil was just evil, not a metaphor for grief or society, just an incarnation of a type of fear. Fear of technology, sexual violence, or, blackness. There's a long history of racializing evil, which will be important later. And to be clear, this approach to examining evil is still alive and well today. It's an ancient one. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. We still make movies like this. However, once World War II hits, a new approach to the portrayal of evil arises, and for reasons that should be pretty obvious. World War II was so bad, the Nazis and fascists so horrific, and ordinary people so complicit, that it basically spawned a global philosophical, spiritual, and artistic reckoning. We get surrealism, absurdism, existentialism, and cosmic horror going into overdrive. The fear of a species-wide extinction revitalized in an atomic global age. We started to ask new questions about evil. What is it exactly? Does it really come from the devil? There are some people who definitely just love cruelty, and others who don't care either way about causing cruelty so long as they get what they want. But then there are other people who do evil because they've been convinced it's the morally good thing to do. And others still who go along with or stay silent about evil, not just because they're afraid to stand up, but because they're not convinced it would be impactful anyway. Evil is more complicated than we originally thought. Maybe it's not demonic possession or being born with a dark heart or mind. And so we begin to look, and honestly, it's how we've gotten some of the best art humanity has ever produced. Why does the sadist love cruelty? What if the villain had a tragic backstory? What if the villain had the wrong solutions to the right analysis? That's a favorite these days. The villain is correct about society, but incorrect on how to address the problem. What if the narcissist was also abused as a child? What if society made him that way? In other words, what about the moral grayness of it all? It's uncomfortable to think that evil isn't a force or an aberration, but a phenomenon that could be perpetuated and directly carried out by otherwise decent people. The TV adaptation of Franz Kafka's Man in the High Castle is particularly good at showing this really uncomfortable phenomenon. Someone can be a good father, a loving husband, a selfless Samaritan, and then go to work at a Nazi concentration camp without a second thought. I mean, that's fucking scary. Scarier than some demonic entity, in my opinion, because it means you could be doing evil right now and not even know it. You could be convinced to do it, despite having a good heart. This line of philosophical and artistic questioning naturally leads us to the rise of the anti-hero, because it's a mirror version of the same question. What if the good guy isn't all that good? What if they themselves struggle with morality? What if good and evil were a spectrum? Cue the proverbial, we're not so different, you and I. This is why both Batman and the various iterations of the Joker are so enduring. It's all about evil and shades of gray. Whether we're examining a demonic, otherworldly, almost supernatural kind of evil, or a complex shades of gray kind of evil, when we look at evil, we're looking for meaning. We're studying it. We're repulsed, but transfixed. And rightfully so. Inquisitions into the nature of cruel desires and outcomes is a culturally healthy thing. But when we overfocus on evil people or entities or singular actions, we wind up enthralled and kind of frozen. We start to confuse the vector of evil for evil itself, and we start to fetishize it, even admire it. I mean, just think of all the strangely loving artistic examinations of historically terrible people. Why was Hitler the way he was? What was going on with Jeffrey Dahmer? What's the deal with Trump? How were they made? What were they thinking right before they did it? Did you see his face? Did you see his eyes? What was in his eyes? What reality couldn't he face? What void is he trying to run from?
Who cares about him? He's nothing. He's the result of faulty programming. He's the juice concentrate of a system that needs to be fed dead bodies in order to survive. He's boring and predictable, like the most basic code cycling over and over again until all the women are destroyed and the world just burns.
What are you...
Preach. Who fucking cares? These people don't matter. They aren't meaningful. You can look and look and look, and all you will get is a void. And the thing about voids is they're fascinating. They're perpetual mysteries that spellbind and distract us. They're a blank space to project our own ideas and values into. It's not that evil shouldn't be understood. It's that it shouldn't be solely examined as a phenomenon that manifests in people, because then you become too focused on either the evil person or the evil action. What's important is the impact of evil and the system that produces this boring, rote, unremarkable procession of shit individuals and bad choices that otherwise good people make. We should be tired of looking for meaning where there is none, of admiring the thing that's killing us. Because that is the danger that this scene in A Murder at the End of the World so eloquently speaks on. We run the risk of fretting the humanity or inhumanity of a villain so much that it makes us forget to cast a moral judgment. It makes us forget to ask for real justice. We miss the forest for the trees. A perfect example of this, in my opinion, and boy, am I going to upset a lot of people, is The Last of Us Part 2, which deserves its own video, so I won't do too deep of a dive here. But the artistic intention of that game, as explicitly stated by its writer-director, is to get you to identify with and forgive a character, Abby, who callously tortures a man in front of his daughter, forcing her to watch as she screams and begs and cries for her to stop. The gambit is to get you to forgive her by revealing that Abby is, get this, a human being with feelings who gets slightly better over time, thus redeeming her. She committed this act out of revenge for her father. She loves and grieves and dreams. And she eventually realizes that her bloodthirsty community is wrong to systematically kill an entire people. Wow, what a great person. It's a game so concerned with revealing the complex humanity of a person who does something unforgivably evil that it forgets that having humanity, having a soul, isn't enough of an argument to excuse that level of cruelty. As a result, it's a work of art that asks us to walk away from violence, but without ever obligating us as human beings capable of evil to be responsible for the wrongs we commit. Like walking away from committing violence ourselves as individuals as the highest form of morality. It explicitly ignores the idea that we should try to stop other people from being violent as well.
I hit this one on the head, hard. And he goes down, and his weapon's right there. And he doesn't go for it. I've killed a lot of scars. And, fucking guy. I couldn't do it. Of course, Danny gets in my fucking face about it. I told him I'm done. He can do it himself if he wants. He can do it himself if he wants. He can do it himself if he wants. He can do it himself if he wants.
The Last of Us 2, in my opinion, is too busy pathologizing to grow a spine and say, no matter your tragic backstory, no matter if you eventually realize it's wrong to be part of a genocidal military dictatorship, you aren't redeemed until you reckon with and rectify what you've done. This is also the issue that I had with the recent remake of Silent Hill 2. In the original Silent Hill 2, the fixed camera angles gave the player physical distance and separation from the main character, James Sunderland, which sort of kept you from identifying with him too closely. So when it's eventually revealed that James murdered his sick wife because he was tired of taking care of her, you're more likely to feel further alienated from the character. You're in a better position to analyze him rather than identify with him. The monsters James encounters in the town of Silent Hill are manifestations of his own guilt and desires. They present themselves as feminine, grotesque, and sexualized, and he consistently beats them over and over and over again with blunt objects. That's chilling when the camera is kept far away, encouraging you to refuse identifying with James, even as you are complicit in beating the lady monsters. In the remake, by changing the camera to an over-the-shoulder position and making subtle changes to the script that cast James as more sympathetic and noble, it doesn't just invite us to empathize with him, but to forgive him, because it feels like we are him. There's a big difference between this and this. It's a good thing to explore the shades of gray, to explore the empathetic and human origins of evil actions, or to pathologize and understand why someone might do horrible things. But go too far down that rabbit hole and you start getting movies about Donald Trump starring Sebastian Stan, granting the guy far more importance than he actually has. And that's because, as I said before, whether we're looking for complexity in evil or simplicity in evil, we're still looking for meaning in evil. So when Eat the Rich media portrays the rich, racist capitalists as fundamentally empty, terrible people, not only does it imbue them with grandeur, it gives the impression that they are the enemy, not the actual system that writes their boring lines of code. So let's talk about a movie that takes a completely different approach to all of this and turns almost every single Eat the Rich trope on its head.
You will taste the sweet pain of death. We will make beautiful music together.
All right, if I look different, it's because this is like months later. Why, you may ask? Depression's a wild fucking thing. So I want to give you an example of a film that takes a different approach to and perspective on evil, which hopefully I've illustrated is at the heart of the question of cruelty, which is at the heart of the question of why rich people are like that. I had this whole plan to talk about Sinners. Obviously a film that explores blackness in America, but it doesn't just limit its critique there. It weaves it in inextricably with a larger point about the relationship between consumption and art, implicating capitalism along with colonialism and race. Honestly, it's fucking brilliant. But you guys, I made a terrible mistake. I watched the Morbid Zoo's video about it, and now everything I write about Sinners either pales in comparison to what Mariana Collin has to say or just outright rips it off. So I kind of fucked myself. But what I can do ultimately is summarize her perspective, which, to be clear, is also very much my perspective, and then build from there. Also, I'll let her directly summarize the movie because I always hate that part.
Sinners is about a pair of gangster twins called Smoke and Stack, both played by Michael B. Jordan, who have returned to their Mississippi hometown in 1932 after making a bunch of morally questionable money in Chicago. They're going to use all this money to open a Delta Blues nightclub, and they hire their cousin Sammy to play. Sammy's the real main character. It's really his story you're following. So the movie takes place on opening night of their juke joint, whereupon the party is crashed by vampires. And that's the movie.
So yeah, Sinners is kind of like From Dusk Till Dawn, but inverted slightly, and instead of being terrible, is like a fucking masterpiece. Supposedly, Hollywood executives were upset with the surprise success of the film because Ryan Coogler negotiated a good deal for himself with regards to revenue from the film and its residuals. And they didn't want to set a precedent of artists being fairly compensated. And while I think that's definitely part of it, I think the other unspoken reason why the film's success got the industry so riled up is because, as the Morbid Zoo points out, Sinners very much refuses to be optimized for profit.
This movie isn't about who's in it or why. It's not about franchising. It is about music.
What makes the content of the film so special, though, is how it treats vampirism. The vampires in the film aren't really portrayed as wanting blood. They don't want to feed off the body. They want to feed off of culture. And as the Morbid Zoo points out, Coogler seems to be saying that the evil of the vampires, the thing that makes them irredeemably anti-human, is their submission to a life of, as she puts it, angry hedonism. Submission to a life based around the logic of consumption. And we're all susceptible to it, not just the rich.
What Remick is offering in exchange for Sammy's blues magic is what you might call hedonistic anger. He's making the case that the answer to oppression is to devote your life to the delirium of free consumption. Out-consume the people who hate you until everybody is brought together in a single, homogeneous, overpowering greed. Remick isn't lying. This is, in a really twisted way, true equality. Everybody's defining themselves by exactly one common feature, and that feature is appetite.
And this logic of consumption usually comes knocking with the promise of equality through money.
What do you think make of that, the way that this kind of is, again, this community is actually saying, the vampires in my head, what they were doing is like, this utopia we're going to create where everyone's equal, free love, everyone's equal because we're coming together. They don't see themselves as the bad guys.
We're going to create we're going to create this utopia, but there's one little thing we got to do in order to create this. We got to kill y'all.
Yeah.
And not only do we have to destroy you, we have to destroy you violently.
Yeah.
And when that's all done, we'll have a utopia.
Yeah.
Remick, the main vampire, is really after Sammy, the character whose music is so good that it's able to reveal the past and future trajectory of art itself and allow those who participate in it to feel connected to their ancestors and descendants, their culture, their community. The Morbid Zoo notes that even though Remick has his own culture's beautiful folk music, he is unable to conjure the same thing that Sammy can, specifically because he's a vampire. He can play and sing his music, he can consume his music, orgiastically even, but he can never really digest. He wants the one thing that he can't have, and the irony that he overlooks is the fact that in trying to get it, he'll destroy it. That's what vampirism is.
Any entity that sucks from any other entity that for its own use, any entity that says, I see you, but I can't appreciate you. No, I have to take from you. And if taking from you involves destroying you, then,
Yeah. I bring up Marx because in my research for this, you know, he would use vampire metaphors to describe it. It's like, you need bodies, you need labor. You take him, but you're not giving back.
That's right.
That the minute they take the white man's dollar, when they're like, we're going to get this money.
It's over.
Over. And I think
it's over.
And then I guess packing that in with the music, and you think about music and who has historically made money from black music. So I guess like, how are you feeling about that?
You're telling it. You're telling it that's it.
Culture is a funny thing because it's paradoxically preserved through ongoing evolution. I mean, that's the point of the pivotal scene where Sammy conjures all those different cultural ghosts. But a vampiric approach to art can only ever destroy culture, usually by fetishizing it. Forgive me for suggesting, but that might be more relatable than any of us care to admit. Community and connection and meaning are hard to find because it's been traded in for, what's the phrase? A little bit of everything. Is it possible that in our loneliness, we, like Remick, are looking for these things through our own consumption, and in that process, also aiding in its destruction?
Culture is a participatory process, and that participation is what the vampires have sacrificed in exchange for superficial safety and power. They have committed to never actually participating in the culture around them. All they can do is consume. They can never really create because a vampire's existence depends on being hidden, both spiritually and literally. Never being able to see the sun is a double metaphor. You can never feel warmth again, and you can never exist in the light, which is to say you can never exist within the realm of public perception. You can never really be seen as you are or leave a cultural legacy. You'll always just be drawing off someone else's energy like a leech.
Sinners is saying that this process, that's the real evil, or at least the evil that we should be looking at. It's not the individual and their choices. It's not their pathology or their backstory. It's not even the class so much as it is the logic behind it. It's the state of vampirism, the rationale of consumption. Eat the rich and the poor and yourself. And everything else too. Now, obviously, Sinners is a movie that's commenting on a lot more than just the broad strokes of consumptive attitude and art. It has a lot more to say about racism, the role of religion in colonized groups, the sacred and the profane, music itself. I think those deeper conversations about the film are better served in a different video with a different, maybe not so entirely white creator. But here, I just want to say that this approach to evil feels really new and deeply humanist. The attempted destruction of art and culture doesn't stop and start at the actions of individual failed moral actors. It's a predictable result emanating from the consumptive state of being, a state of metaphorical non-existence, all ushered in by money and colonialism. You know, the real evil.
People we were people, yes, we were people that came from a place where that's not how shit worked. The music was not to be bought and sold. It was a way of life. So the moment you start trying to sell it, you know, we already are putting the concept of ownership in transfers, and we now turning like a system of healing into property. Yeah. And we're doing it to a people that have been turned into property, and on land that was someone else's land that has now been turned into property.
Despite Remick's tragic backstory, Coogler isn't too concerned about turning the character into some quasi-redeemable, morally gray figure. He's not an anti-hero. He doesn't pathologize him in a loving way, nor does he make him the actual focus of his critique. Coogler still manages to caution us that we ourselves are susceptible to becoming a vampire. It isn't an us versus them thing, because we can very easily become them.
I wanted a vampire who had been affected by this shit. Like it was not, because so often the shrewdest business person that you meet, if it wasn't them, you go back a few generations, somebody in their family was on the other end of a fuck deal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And nobody's more shrewd than a person who's been fucked over. Coming from where I'm from, the moment some shit becomes a business, somebody's getting fucked. You know what I'm saying? And it's usually everybody.
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
So it points out the fact that we are all capable of evil, while also giving space to suggest that we don't always need to fret about the tragedy of the individuals who have succumbed to it. And I think that's a really useful and important way to look at what's going on in the world right now. For instance, there is nothing redeemable or interesting or complicated about the ICE agent who loves his wife and children and country and helps a little old lady across the street after he's done violently ripping a family apart. There's no complexity or substance to be found in the IDF soldier who cares for his sick mother after blasting a school full of children with white phosphorus. There's no meaning or greater understanding to be found by pathologizing narcissists or sadists or neo-fascists or serial killers or whatever. These people aren't fascinating. They aren't important. They're boring. Like the most basic line of code repeating over and over again until all the women are dead and the world burns. Vampires. Simple as that. And the only thing that can stop a vampire is a wooden stake to the heart. Or, I don't know, maybe a silver bullet.